The Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Welcome to the Pediatric Lounge. This is your co-host, Dr. Herb Bravo. With us today is our co-host, Dr. George Rogo, and our guest, Dr. Hershel Lessin. Dr. Lessin is a practicing pediatrician in New York. He's active with the American Academy of Pediatrics at a national policy level, including helping to draft the practice implementation guidelines for attention deficit disorder. He's also the founder of one of the largest supergroups in New York. Welcome, George, and welcome, Dr. Hershel. How are you guys today?
Everyone does that. It's Dr. Lessin, you see. Dr. Hershel is my first name, and everybody does that. It's the trouble of having a weird first name.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Okay, me too. I'm glad to talk to you. My internet in my house is down, so I'm resorting to an iPhone, which is not optimal, but the best I can do.
You know what? You resolved the problem. You didn't just throw your hands up in the air. Oh, my internet's down. I can't do what I got to do. You fixed the problem, which is a big character trait in a lot of physicians and a lack of in others.
Why did you become a pediatrician?
You know, it's so funny. I always wanted to be a doctor since I'm like 5 years old. And I've always remembered that's all I wanted to do. I think it has to do from the fact that I was the kind of kid that ran down the hall and had to be tackled before shots. And I said, okay, I need to be on the right end of this needle. I think that's the main reason. And I chose pediatrics because, frankly, I don't much like adults. I like kids. I'd listen to a million, clingy moms and everything and needy moms before I'd listen to one adult with back pain seeking narcotics.
Yeah.
I just don't like adults when it comes to medicine.
You went through Stanford.
Yes.
And then the Yale New Haven Hospital for Children's now, right? That's what it's called now?
Yes, that's what it's called now.
And after that, you went into private practice and you founded Children's Medical Group up in New York.
Well, actually, what happened was I joined an existing group of 4 to replace their retiring senior partner. And what I found was guys that were so clueless about anything business, they didn't even have a pension plan. This was in 1982. And just out of residency, I knew you needed a pension plan. So I tried to tune this practice up, and we were together for about, 15 years. Then, things were getting tight, and we got an offer from a sort of a megalomaniacal ER guy that was way ahead of his time and wanted to form a group without walls amongst family practitioners and primary care doctors. So he recruited a bunch of people, and literally we had meetings once a week for a solid year. And when we got close to pulling the trigger and we're doing our due diligence, I realized that we were the cash cows of this group. And the other group, which is interesting, my worst competition was also a 4-doctor group. They'd been around since 1932. We'd been around since 1954. And they were like our worst enemies. We really did not like one another at all. But when I was talking with their guy, I realized that, hey, we have a lot more in common with each other than we do with this group. So we both said, I'll quit if you'll quit. So we both quit, and then we started trying to get together ourselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a very
That was in
interesting.
1997.
I remember that article. I remember seeing the cover. Actually, that was one of the first things that I've seen about private practice and started my brain to start spinning. I don't remember if it was medical economics or contemporary pediatrics when they used to come to your house. the paper?
Yep. I mean, George, what you're remembering is we were on the cover of Pediatric Medical Economics when we did this.
Then that's
And
what it was, yeah.
this was like totally insane in 1997 because
Yeah.
no one was thinking that way except for one very large group in Florida.
Yeah.
And other than that, nobody was doing this stuff.
Wow.
Mhm.
So one of the fascinating things about you, other than oodles and oodles of articles, is how you're able to bring group of physicians together. Physicians are some of the most difficult cats to herd.
You're absolutely correct there.
So how do you start herding the physicians when there's three of us in one room in a small practice?
Well, whenever you're doing anything with anybody trying to get agreement, you have to try to figure out what the other party wants and needs. Because as I've learned from courses and from real life, no one will do anything for your reasons. They'll only do it for their own reasons. And your job to bring people together is to try to convince them why your reasons are aligned with their reasons and everyone can benefit. Because if you can't do that, particularly with doctors who always think they're the smartest person in the room and know more than anybody else and don't like to be told what to do, you're going to get nowhere. So you have to try to convince them. So for our merger, the 1 year of meetings and literally a stack of paper to the ceiling convinced them that maybe this getting together was a good idea. And then we had to do it with our worst enemy, if you will, although we realized that if we could take $5 from the specialists, we do much better than stealing one patient from each other.
Wow.
Right.
So the first thing is understanding what the other people in the room are motivated by.
Absolutely. And that can range from something they want to something they're afraid of. And both of them are equally motivated. I think the latter, fear, is probably the biggest motivator when they see something going on that could be a problem for them. And you say, okay, I've got a potential solution for you.
So what did you tell them that what did they want? And what did
Well,
they fear?
we were only 4. We had 2 offices. The other group had 4. They had 1 office. They were much busier than us. They had a different culture. Their leadership and myself had a similar perspective on things. And then we realized that, we're not going to make it alone against all these. We saw the consolidation. I mean, I was president of an IPA at the time, which grew to 3,000 doctors. And I was the president. That was a multi-specialty independent practice association. So we could see what was coming. So we said, we've got to get some scale and some size or we're going to go nowhere. We'll get crushed.
So I guess they're afraid of consolidation and being taken over or being the last man standing.
Right. Or just be fighting against some large group that they have no resources to fight against.
Right.
Or compete with. Fight against isn't a good word. Compete with is a better word.
Back in the day, when they first started, I remember when they started our practice in 58, I think it was, in somebody's garage, they had one piece of paper, remember, where they had like 20 encounters on each piece of paper, and the diagnosis is, well, baby.
Yeah, I know.
Guidance,
PE0, assessment, otitis media, plan, amoxicillin. That was your note.
You could really, really churn them out. And you sent the bill, it came back in, but now with all the technology and all the systems and the computers, it's a little bit more.
You might say, and that's a whole nother talk.
I know,
about
that's your favorite
electronic
part.
records, but I can tell you my productivity went down 50% with electronic records.
Yeah.
Wow. And your quality didn't get any
I don't think
better.
it improved at all. I think electronic records are the biggest false advertising around because everything they advertise of better records, better control, better information is all nonsense because electronic records as currently structured is simply a billing mechanism. It has nothing to do with quality. It has nothing to do with care. It has nothing to do with anything except oversight, jumping through hoops, and making it impossible to extract useful information from the word vomit, as I call it, that comes from electronic records.
I think, hold on, Herb. I think with the records, there is something to say, because I remember back in the day, nobody could read your handwriting.
It's true. And, and I do a lot of med mal work. So I do see I saw a lot of cases that were really illegible and you had to have them transcribed.
Yeah.
And that was a terrible problem. And it is. But when you look at electronic records, when they do a well child visit from the assessment well child, and it's 40 pages long.
Well, that's too much. It's
impossible to find any useful information in that mass of data.
Right.
So it's equally inaccessible in my mind until that gets fixed.
Yeah, there has to be a happy ground in between.
My perspective on that is that I don't know if either one of you is old enough to remember the Palm. No, before the Palm Pilot was called the Newton.
Yeah.
It was a personal.
I'm actually older than you, Herb. So,
so the Newton was an Apple product that was, sort of like the first version of a smartphone. It flopped. It was awful.
Totally.
Then the Palm Pilot came around, and I kept thinking, like, I'm gonna have to learn a whole new language to use this. I don't have time for that. So, but I bought one, and it's part of the logo for the podcast, because it's funny how it was useless. Then everybody got the Crackberries. I never got a Crackberry.
I didn't either.
Why do I need that for? Just so people think I'm smart? I don't need that. And finally, we did get to the smartphone, Apple, and it did change the game. So I think we're probably at the Newton level of evolution in the EMR. There will be a point where it will be useful and they won't have to pay or coerce you to use it. So I think we're there. So once you got your group to work together, you went through this big journey of trying to get your competition in the same town to work together.
Well, yeah, we start when 1984, when the HMO law passed in New York, before there was any HMO laws, Blue Cross came to us with a proposal. They said, we're going to aggregate every doctor in this community into 40 doctor panels. And we're going to assign the panel, and we're going to put you at risk, and you have no choice in who you work with. And that started us to say, hey, this is nonsense. And when we read I'm pretty good at contracts now, but back then I didn't know anything, but this contract was so horrible, even I could see how bad it was. So we started having meetings, and we formed an organization, and we got 250 docs to join. And then we later asked them for $1,000 each so we could have some money to hire a consultant, and violating every security law in the book, by the way, which we had to fix. But we fixed that. A consultant showed us how. But what struck me is our president at the time was this older fellow, probably my age. And he had a big cigar. He was a cardiologist. And he sat down, and we called a meeting with Blue Cross, and 3 of us went from the IPA, the leadership, and they brought about 25 people, 16 vice presidents, everybody. And they sat in the room and said, well, this is the deal, and you're going to have 40 doctor panels, blah, blah, blah. And Marvin, who was our leader at the time, says, well, that's totally unacceptable. We're not going to do that. And he said, I'm sorry, it's not negotiable. And we said, thank you, we're not interested. And the 3 of us got up and walked out. And I don't think I've ever seen a suit that confused by a doctor behaving in this fashion.
Wow.
So and they never got any traction. One, because it was a terrible idea. And we would send weekly emails to everyone saying, read this contract. Do you know what means what hold harmless means? Do you realize what a risk model is? And none of them had any idea what any of those words meant. And we just kept weekly pointing out every line in the contract that was abusive.
So your physician leader at the time do something that Harvard School of Negotiation calls BANTA, your best alternative to negotiating.
Right.
So he just walked out. That was the best alternative. And that's very powerful when you do that. Then you were able to get this group of only pediatricians, as I understand.
No, this was everybody, orthopedists.
But this was the IPA.
Yeah, you talk about cats. Oh, my God. That was multiples worse than putting our group together.
So when you started, when the the Children's Medical Group was founded, there's only pediatricians and it's one practice. It's one.
And yes, I think since we did this, I was been given lectures about practice aggregation models to pediatricians. And what we found was we kept describing our model. And after all these years, I figured out we're the only one that did our model.
Okay.
Because it's fantastically difficult to do, because it was a full asset merger and everyone had to get along, and it was very tough. And the new models like Group Without Walls and even IPAs are somewhat easier to get docs to go along with.
Well, evaluation is very difficult, right? Of different practices and putting all that together.
Well, you have to make a decision. Can I sit at a meeting with this physician? Is that acceptable? Or can I really practice with this person? And they're very different items. There are lots of docs I could sit at a meeting at, but would never want to practice with them. And so that decides whether you want to be partners or whether you want to be part of a group that has common goals, but can allow sometimes different tax ID numbers, sometimes not, can allow you to do your own thing in some part or another. And that's why the way these things are governed is the absolute key to making them work.
What are these common goals usually?
Well, the common goals obviously is to try to maintain some quality and control from the money guys while still making enough money to keep your doors open and make your payroll. Because despite what people think, pediatricians are at poverty level for doctors. We're the lowest paid specialty other than psychiatrists. And we sure see more than 8 patients a day like they do. So we are the lowest paid. And it's a lot of times you couldn't make your payroll because your overhead is ridiculously high. And what the companies will pay you is so low, it may not cover your overhead. So you had to do something or else you were going to be leaving soon.
Yeah. Yep. And so once you structure this new group, was it just the 4 pediatricians in your group and the 4 pediatricians on the other group in town, and then it grew organically, or you acquired more practices?
Well, it's interesting. It grew organically because we literally had a consultant and spent a year working it out. They would see almost twice as many patients as we did, but we would spend time with them and they operated more like a assembly line. And so we managed to look for best practices so we could increase our volume, but decrease their assembly line feel. And then they were making more money than we were. So we had to figure a ramp up to get us equivalent and all equal partners. And that took quite a while and a fair amount of negotiation. I took way less salary than they did for the first 3 years because realistically, I saw less patients than they did. And that's what I was earning. And as we tried to ramp up the best practices where we all came closer to one another, that's when we finally got it together to actually be partners. And then you have to structure the governance so that you can't have a group of 8 people making decisions. It's impossible. It doesn't work. You have to have an executive committee of maybe 3 people. Okay. And that's representative to the others, but they have to have authority to do stuff. And I see groups now, I see a 500 doctor group in the area that before they got sold to United Healthcare had a single CEO. And even though they were all partners, there was only 1 vote in that practice. Okay.
So what do you think is the optimal? Governance is key, but what is the optimal for that executive board? How many people do you want? 3 to 5?
3 to 5. Anything more is unwieldy, I think. And you have to have written in your bylaws what your limits are. How much can that executive board spend without a approval? Can you change policies? Can you say, hey, this is what we're going to do for otitis media, for ear infections. This is our policy. We appointed a medical director, and we said the 3 of us would agree on a policy, and then we'd roll it out and try.
I don't feel comfortable with how you want me to practice. They'll say, I don't feel
basically, yes, saying, hey, we're in one group. We can't have every doctor doing different things. We can't have that. And it's not that you have to follow it, but it's best practices. That's the way you gauge it, is do the best job based on what the current recommendations are. And docs always think they know better than recommendations, so they don't follow them.
So on this executive committee, you have a medical director, chief operations, or CEO.
Well, we weren't quite that organized. We had the three of us, and we did everything.
Okay, so everybody wore everybody's hat. Okay.
Yeah,
and
but you see, the key point, now that you say that, is that you have to let go. I have to say, well, this guy does the negotiating better than me, so I'm going to let him do it. And this guy does the scheduling better than me. Same thing. And this guy writes some pretty good protocols for medical stuff. So I'm going to walk away and let him do it. And I'm going to do what I'm good at, and they should walk away from that. Because that's the only way it really works.
Right. Like a good marriage,
like a
right?
team. It works like a team. And this is
you
where
have
I think
to have it as a team.
This is where private practice is getting into problems, because everybody wants to be that quarterback for everything. You can't have 10 quarterbacks, you know?
No, you can't. So
and let me ask you one more question. So you have an executive committee. How often would you meet with all the shareholders?
Well, we had 9 shareholders when we started, 8 actually, we grew to 9, and we would meet every single week, literally every single week. And then we hired a real CEO. We hired a guy that was running a 900-bed VA hospital at the time to work in our group, to be our CEO. And, you know, he was like he died and in heaven getting out of the VA and being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And we got somebody who actually knew systems and knew how to structure a management.
Okay, and he brought a level of management that, you know, us physicians we're not trained to do. Yes.
Yeah. Discipline, saying, no, you can't have everything your way.
I know.
Did you have a lot of pushback? A lot of physicians don't like.
That's true. And again, I mean, within our own group, we managed to say, hey, look how much better we're doing than everybody else. You want to kill this golden goose? Don't do that. Let us run it. We're doing it good.
Okay.
And, you know, they wanted opinions, but I think deep down they realized that we would discuss what they wanted. And if we didn't like it, we told them why. And they sort of acquiesced because they kind of realized that wasn't something they were really good at. And we let some of the partners be doctors. The problem is, in a business sense, you know, a partner needs to help you run the business. A partner that sees patients can do an excellent job, but he isn't really helping with the advancement of the practice much.
Correct.
Unless he has a huge reputation or is good at marketing or something else that enables him to grow the practice. So it's really important, and tell physicians, is that everybody doesn't have to be a partner.
So that's a big question for growing groups. I have 3 partners who don't want to be involved in the management of the practice, yet they get really upset if I'm being paid to spend 2 days a week away from patient care running the practice. So your solution is don't make them partners.
Well, no. Well, initially, if you have a choice, I mean, we came with some partners. We had them. Okay. So there's nothing we could do about that. And actually, we worked for free for a while. We took extra vacation. We took admin days. We took other things. Finally, it came down to, as another doctor in a very large group said, hey, if you want me to keep doing this, you're going to pay me, because I earn you more in business than I do actually seeing patients. And I think the big danger with doctors aggregating is that they don't, business is evil somehow. And it's not evil. You can do good and be good to your patients, have high quality medicine, be good to the community, be a partner, and you can do well for yourselves. They're not mutually exclusive. And the trouble is, there's enough charlatans and creeps out there that sometimes gets hard to see. But if you have that in your mind that you're going to do good, you can do well.
Do good quality medicine and the money will follow. If you follow the money, which is like what the hospitals are doing, you will never, ever do good medicine.
Or, you know, they say no margin, no mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's from a group. If I can't make my payroll, who's going to see the patients?
That's right. That's right.
We took Medicaid since the beginning of the program, 1965. Both groups took Medicaid, okay? And we still take Medicaid. And we're the biggest Medicaid provider in the area. And we must be up to about 30 or 40% Medicaid now.
Oh, wow.
But what's important is your contracts.
Right.
You know, if you can't get a contract that keeps that, you can't make up a loss on volume. So if you're seeing a lot of Medicaid patients for less than it costs you to see them, you can either keep doing that and go out of business, or stop taking Medicaid or negotiate with them. Those are the only choices, and they're hard choices.
But Medicaid is difficult to negotiate with. So they have the other pieces that a lot of practices don't know about. There's a quality incentive programs, which they give you extra funding at the end of the year if you do good quality metrics. And then there's the new thing, which is the value-based contracts, which a lot of practice groups don't know about. The hospitals do, and they can't wait to get you part of it to take your roster. Again, back to, but you got to aggregate data into some kind of population health dashboard or something to prove it. You know?
Right. You need a very large number of people to do value. The reason is that nobody has a clue what's value, and nobody has a clue what's a good outcome. And the data they use currently is basically measures you doing stuff. Doesn't say whether the doing stuff does any good. It just measures, you get cholesterol every X years.
That's absolutely right. We're far away from that. It's interesting to me, most physicians don't even know what their cost per visit is.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So how can you negotiate a contract? Just throw a number out there. It cost me $55 to see the average patient in my office. And Medicaid in Virginia pays $50 for a 99213. I'm losing $5 at every visit. And as you say, if you're losing $5 per visit, you can see 50, you're losing 50 times 5 now.
You can't make it up on
you can't
volume,
make it up.
Know?
That is such a pearl of wisdom there. That
one of the things that happened, and a lot of my colleagues reacted in horror, was managed Medicaid, meaning the government did such a bad job of it that they farmed it out to managed care companies. And while they're generally evil as a rule, and they truly are evil, most of them, but they can be negotiated with, because they have to meet certain metrics for the government, or else the government punishes them. They get financial rewards for certain metrics. And if you can prove that you can give those metrics, then they're willing to pay you. But if you have no idea what the metrics are, if you have no idea how much it costs to see a patient, you're blind.
But you know what those metrics are? They're pretty darn simple. Is what we do every single day. Visits, vaccines, HPV, Tdap, combo 3 vaccines.
Not giving antibiotics to every kid with a cold.
They don't look at that so much. They look at that.
They do up here.
They do?
Yeah. I mean, they have metrics saying how many kids who are on antibiotics for sore throat get a throat culture.
That's a fascinating topic for another day, because it's a whole other area, right? So I'm really interested, because I don't have the patience you have or the people skills that you have.
No one ever accused me of either of those things, but
to be able to sit in a room with 20 other physicians and hash out guidelines on ADD or ADHD, whatever you want to call it. How does that happen? How do you persuade people in that arena, which is very far from most of us in clinical practice?
Well, you're alluding to the fact that I was part of the national guideline writing group for ADHD, and I'm actually the co-lead author of the ADHD toolkit for the Academy. And I got involved. Anyone can get involved with the Academy if you can stomach some of the stuff they do. But when you get involved, it's nice, because if you really get involved, you get to write some policy. And so I've written 5 or 6 policies nationally, which is wonderful, but it's a challenge. In your own practice, I think you need to have 2 or 3 of the really good guys sit down and write a good policy and start trying to tear it apart. And then you have to figure out the workflow that works that policy. And what we did with the national ADHD policy was, I think, a first for the Academy. The original policy from 2011-ish or so, they did an innovation. They did the policy, And then they did a second part of it called process of care, meaning how the heck can you get your office to do, and how the heck can you make money at it? And it was interesting because the AP had never done that before. And then when I got on the policy writing committee, the policy didn't change much because not that much had changed. And the process of care had changed. So we, tuned that up a bit. But I ended up convincing them to write barriers to adoption section, because they come out with all sorts of policies that when we in practice read them, we're going, oh, that's nice. These guys have never actually worked with patients in an office, and no one could possibly do what they say and keep their doors open. So we wrote a complete paper called Barriers to Adoption of this policy, which went through all the things that could go wrong. And I urge everyone just to read that section. I'm trying to get the Academy to put a section like that in every policy.
That would be an
uphill battle.
That would be a great thing if the Academy would do that. But walk me through it. Like, what do? Do you go to Chicago and meet in a huge room with 25 other doctors and you throw paper and pens at them because they don't know what they're doing? Or how does it work?
Well, it's sort of like politics. You never quite knows what goes into the sausage. Okay. Most policies literally take 2 to 3 years before they're finalized. And, I may be running out of juice here, so I'm going to walk over and get a charger here. Okay. Because I didn't realize I was going to be doing this. So I'm going to plug my phone in and hold it, I'm afraid. So what you do is there's these committees, and there are existing policies that go along with it, okay? And you work off that base, and then you say, do we need any revisions? Do we need any changes to be made? But what you do is you get a group of quote unquote experts. And the problem with the Academy is all the experts are academics, and they know absolutely nothing about the real world or what happens in a pediatric office. So they give you these pie in the sky recommendations, which are totally untenable. So that's why you get all these policies that most of us in practice just chuckle at, because you can't do them. It's just impossible. So what goes is you write your policy. Like I wrote a couple immunization policies. There's not a lot of discord on that, although there was plenty when we talked about whether you should see non-vaccinating families or whether you can discharge them. So what happens is you write your policy and you finally agree within your group of 15 people that go to Chicago to the Academy headquarters to do this before COVID, of course. Now it was all Zoom. But before COVID, you do it in person, which is way better in my opinion. But you'd go, you'd meet, you'd have the academics, you'd have, if they were good, they had a couple people in practice on there to temper it. And then you'd hash out something and it'd be a vote. And then someone would be assigned to write it. The lead authors would be the writers. And then once they wrote it, we'd tear it apart. And then once we came to agreement, then the fun begins. Then you have to send it out to every other committee in the Academy that could possibly have some sort of
opinion,
interest in this. And every single one of them became an expert on your policy. And so they would send you, oh, we don't like this language, or oh, this is wrong. And you had to reconcile all 20 or 30 committee complaints, and you had to address every single one of them saying, no, this is wrong for the following reason, or yeah, that's a good idea, we'll change it. And you had you had the Academy's library people pull all the articles, and you get to review them, because no normal human being can do that. Unless, again, your occasional academic, you can do that. But they usually had them. And then when it all came done, you reconciled everything. Then it would go to the board of directors. And then they could just shoot it down. Say, no, we don't like this section.
Okay. That's a lot of work. But thanks for doing progress. Thanks for doing that. But thanks for doing that. Those ADD guidelines were very nicely done.
Well, we tried real hard on that. I'm very proud of those.
So we're getting towards the end of this podcast show, and I always have an exit question for our guests. What book are you reading? One title, and then we got to say goodbye.
Okay, one title. I read a lot of slasher books and legal mysteries. Grisham, Jack Reacher, Lucas Davenport. Anyone who reads those books will know. And those are all characters.
Great.
Okay, cool.
Well, thank